Good afternoon. I am Brian Hawkins, the Senior Director of External Affairs at People United for Privacy Foundation. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn on how to build bipartisan coalitions in the states. We here at PUFP take pride in our ability to forge diverse ideological coalitions in support of nonprofit donor privacy. The subject of today's Lunch and Learn is the Colorado Personal Privacy Protection Act, which was signed into law last month. The PPPA prohibits government agencies from compelling nonprofits to disclose their donor and member lists. Including Colorado, the PPPA has passed in 20 states, which is a landmark achievement from where we started with our first state in West Virginia 6 years ago. Though the subject of today's session is Colorado is emblematic of a broader trend of how the PPPA has brought together unusual allies. The bill has been signed into law by both Republican and Democrat governors, has been supported by both Republican and Democrat state lawmakers, and has passed multiple legislative chambers unanimously, to include both chambers in Colorado. Today's panelists feature Ted Trimpa and PUFP Vice President Matt Nese. Ted is a consultant and fundraiser for progressive causes in Colorado. If you're like me, a Republican who laments that Colorado has turned blue, you can blame Ted. Matt is the vice president at People United for Privacy. He is a nationally renowned expert on donor privacy issues and has engineered the success of the PPPA throughout the states. A few housekeeping notes. John Caldara, of the president of the Independence Institute, is unable to make it. He was an important partner for us in Colorado. We look forward to getting his thoughts later. A few other notes. We will keep this a strict 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box, and we'll get to them if there's time. And with that, let's jump into it. Ted, I called you out. I'm happy you appreciated that one.
Yeah, I love the shout out. I love the shout out.
Conventional wisdom suggests that progressives generally don't align with conservatives on this issue, but clearly Colorado just demonstrates otherwise. Why did Colorado progressives care about this?
Well, I think first off, it's a matter of approach because the principle is something that's relatively simple, and that is that you have a membership list of any type of C organization. You don't want that used as a political pawn or for other reasons or people to start fishing for something. And how we did it in Colorado is we went to those organizations and key leaders within the Democratic side first and build the support, because the challenge that you have in the hyper partisan environment that we live in today, many times if something comes out, it's a Republican bill, then you see this many times, I'm sure, it's an ALEC bill. If it's an ALEC bill, therefore it is bad. And our side, it's something that's Soros back, so therefore it's bad. And it's just really important from the beginning that you use those relationships that you have in order to build a little bit of trust. And the other piece is be completely transparent. This is where we passed. This is what's gone on. A lot of Republican chambers have done it. Give people the credit that they're as smart as they really are.
Awesome. I want to dig into that further, but first I want to introduce Shayne Madsen as a longtime Dodger fan and believer in the DH. I am very happy that Shayne was able to step in to be our DH for John. So thank you, Shayne, for joining us. So we'll have Independence Institute's work represented on this. I'll give Shayne a few seconds to get herself gathered, say hello, and we'll come back to you in a second. But
thank you.
In the meantime, Matt, and Ted, I do want to go back to you because you said a lot of interesting things there. Now, Matt, you've been able to have a big picture perspective on the PPPA, managing this in different states. What are some lessons that you've learned from other states that you were able to apply here in Colorado?
Well, the first lesson, which might not be so helpful, is that every state is different. It's actually kind of remarkable. I'm not just talking about political culture, of course, or even the law that we have to take into account when crafting the PPPA to tailor to the needs of each specific state. I'm just talking about the things that come up, potential sources of support and challenges, but certainly a few things of note that are commonalities. We are increasingly seeing, and your opening certainly mentioned it, Brian, that it is absolutely possible, regardless of whether you're a red, blue, or purple state, or what your political culture is, that you can pass the PPPA and you can get support for nonprofit donor privacy through any state in the country. Now, it's not to say all the states are easy or the same, but certainly Republicans, Democrats, nonprofits of all persuasions and spaces on the political spectrum, I think there's absolutely an understanding among all that we value this First Amendment right, that we value the need to protect the privacy of our members and supporters, because that's the way it's always been. What's new is the threats to donor and member privacy, and the PPPA safeguards that, it codifies that, and regardless of where you fall on the spectrum or what your beliefs are or what you're advocating for, you can understand why this right is so crucially important. The other thing I would note, and this is certainly the case, so the PUFP has learned this over the years, education is paramount. We know a lot about why this issue is important, but a group working on Second Amendment issues or healthcare issues, environmental issues, it might not be top of mind. They're focused on the policies that are priorities for their members and supporters, and historically for the organization. And it takes sometimes a bit of time to explain why this matters, what threats exist, why the Personal Privacy Protection Act is so crucial to their continued existence. And the same goes for lawmakers, of course. So I would say education. We've learned over the years, you can't just jump into a state. You need to go in and take time to meet and explain the issue and why it matters. And that's something we've learned over the course of succeeding in 20 different states.
I'm seeing a common theme of kind of trust that you and Ted both kind of mentioned in your remarks, and I want to go back to that. But first, Shayne, Independence Institute came to this issue a few years ago. Can you share a little bit more about the story with Independence Institute and how it became a big issue for you guys?
Well, actually, and I'm Shayne Madsen filling in for John Caldera. For those of you who know John, you know he's sprightly and very energetic and entertaining. I am not. Notwithstanding all of that, I'd say the Independence Institute was dragged, if you will, kicking and screaming into this issue almost 15 years ago when a campaign finance complaint was filed against them. And I think that happens with almost every group that advocates in this space. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how many times you're going to need a lawyer until it really happens to you. But I did want to underscore what both Ted and Matt were saying. You have to have respect for your political allies and your political opponents when you're pursuing this particular issue, and engage everybody with transparency and respect at the get-go. Because even though campaign finance is really a political theater that all of us play as it gets near to the elections, it's not an area where you really want to advocate in such a way that the First Amendment is put at risk. So the Independence Institute learned the hard way. We prevailed. We learned. We've never had a complaint since I started representing them. And I think almost every group on this call wants to be able to say the same thing.
Awesome. Before the call, Ted mentioned that Shayne, you two have known each other for a very long time. I won't say the number, but
Do not say the number.
You guys have known each other for a long time. How much do those type of relationships and having that trust come into play in building these coalitions in Colorado from both sides? Like, was it Ted, you're going back to your partners on the progressive side saying, hey, Independence Institute are good people, this is a good thing we're doing, and Shayne vice versa. Can you talk a little bit more about the mechanics and the dynamics of how those personal relationships played a role?
Sure. This comes back to some of the comments that Matt was making, and personal relationships really, really matter. And that's why when you go state to state, it's going to be different. And you need to make sure the coalition that you're building and the people that are leading it understand those relationships, but also have a connection to organizations like United for Privacy, because you're going to need that kind of expertise And it's a matter of marrying the two. And it was very important in Colorado. And something I should have mentioned before, part of getting folks and organizations to understand why this is so important is to tie it to something that's very personal to them. And, you know, an issue that is of note, that's front of mind right now, is reproductive rights. And going to organizations that work in this space and say, do you really want your donor list, your membership list to be accessed by a state agency somewhere in there that may be looking for something? There needs to be a statement about those lists need to be kept private. Because, for example, you may have somebody at Focus on the Family, one of the largest evangelical organizations in the world. You could have somebody there giving to a reproductive rights cause. You could have somebody that is involved within the Democratic Party that is giving money to a gun rights group. People need to be able to, you know, have the ability to express themselves. And I think it's really important in order to protect these types of Cs in terms of the donor list and contributors that they have.
And Shayne, on your end, you know, Ted mentioned the Second Amendment groups. What were some of their interest in supporting this initiative?
Well, I think ultimately that they had the same interests that Ted articulated, but they probably didn't embrace it as openly at the start of the conversations. I think those in the reproductive rights movement were a lot more savvy about risk to them and their donors than perhaps the gun rights groups. But I think ultimately everybody we engaged with and had calm conversations with agreed with our point of view. And the whole legislative path had an air of calmness about it, I'd say, in dealing with an issue that could have been pretty cranky. And I think that Ted and the lobbying team were really quite successful in keeping everything gentlemanly, if you could say that, and very calm. And we discussed the principles. We didn't get into any of the histrionics at all.
The other thing, too, is to make sure that you distinguish this from a lot of the campaign finance reform that's going on today. Because sometimes you get away of kind of the, you know, for those that may be involved in this a little bit closer, kind of the HR1 world. You know, we should disclose everything, including the 50 cents that you have in your pocket. And once you start explaining what can happen if you don't have the requirement that there needs to be a specific statutory purpose in order to access that information, then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. Because anyone who needs to see evidence of what can happen if you have, you know, open disclosure of everything is go to Arizona and ask a bunch of reproductive rights organizations and individuals that have been giving as to what can happen to them. It could happen in any state, and you need that basic underlying protection.
Yeah, on that note, Matt, going to kind of get into some of the policy particulars. How do you kind of help people get out of the campaign finance mindset and say, this isn't a campaign finance issue, this is a free speech issue, and kind of draw that line and keep campaign finance from infiltrating donor privacy rights?
So it's a good question. The issue comes up in a lot of places, and I think it's sometimes used intentionally as a red herring, and other times it's unintentionally folks who just don't understand. The Personal Privacy Protection Act itself, I mean, that's where we have to start. It exempts campaign finance reporting. What the legislation does is it stops state agencies and elected officials from going and saying, well, we need your donor list with no justification. It puts guardrails around that practice, and obviously some allowances have to be made for existing reporting and in specific areas, as well as, of course, campaign finance law as well, though we at People United for Privacy don't favor organizations engaging in issue advocacy being forced to report like political organizations. But that said, it's
Matt breaking up.
but also, why are you sorry, I'll repeat myself just in case. We use it as a teaching moment to say the Personal Privacy Protection Act does not implicate existing campaign finance reporting, but at the same time, that you should maybe think twice about why why you would require this gun rights group or this pro-choice group or this tax reform group to subject themselves to campaign finance reporting for just speaking about policy issues before the legislature and educating their those in Colorado or their state. And so it's all campaign finance always comes up, but we use it as a tool to explain that the PPA doesn't implicate it, but that, you should think twice before making groups go through these hoops and hurdles just for speaking out about issues of importance to them and their members.
Open question for the group. What were the response of lawmakers on this initiative? It passed both chambers unanimously, signed into law by Democrat governor. Sounds like it was easy, but as we all know with policymaking, victories like that do not come by easily. It looks easy, but because when you have skilled people navigating it, but what were their response, whether pro or con? Did they immediately understand what was going on and what we're trying to accomplish? Were there any apprehension, and how did you guys overcome some of the questions? And yeah, what did landscape look like?
Let me quickly jump in to say, and this maybe will tee it up for Ted. I think one of the things that helped us from the beginning, and it's been hinted at, and it goes back to the first question you asked me, Brian, about what is it like in other states. I think the biggest thing that helped us is that the bill was introduced with bipartisan co-sponsors in both chambers. So you had a Senate Republican, a Senate Democrat, a House Republican, House Democrat. And that really, in addition to the diverse and bipartisan nonprofit coalition backing the bill, that really settled the temperature. It lowered the temperature. It made everyone understand this is not a partisan move on anyone's part. This is about principle. This is about protecting everyone's rights to engage without sacrificing the privacy of their supporters. And so I would just say at a base level, the work that went into recruiting and securing bipartisan support for the bill in the General Assembly really helped to set things going on an easier path. That was not easy, as Ted and Shayne can attest to, but certainly that was crucial, and a lot of work went into making that happen before any bill was actually introduced. But Ted and Shayne, please feel free to weigh in.
I think the thing to remember about elected officials is whenever you're dealing with them, it's always going to be difficult. Getting an agreement about how you're going to cross a street sometimes can take 15 minutes. But going to Matt's point, it's like so key to have it bipartisan from the beginning. This can't be all of a sudden we're going after people in the other party after we already have something lined up. I think it's super, super key that you come out, for example, that I'm talking to Shayne about it and people know that I'm on the other political side of many issues than the Independence Institute. But when they see that we're working together, then, it's a head tilt. It's like, oh, maybe this is something we should talk about. I'd be interested to see what Shayne's perspective is.
Well, I actually agree with that perspective, but I've always had a philosophy in lobbying that you don't want to talk to a legislator for the first time when you really need them and need their vote. And it's critical that you engage a lobbying team who has a track record of being honest. They may be partisan, but they need a track record of being honest and candid and transparent. And that's what we had in this particular situation. And everybody talked early on. Early on is the key, and communicate and lay the groundwork.
Quick note for our audience, if you have questions, please submit Q&A at this time, and we look forward to taking some questions. So one of the things we kind of talked about earlier were some of the lessons from other states, and Matt made a really good point of every state is unique. What are some unique things about Colorado politics and political culture?
I'm not touching that one.
Those goes.
Well, let's head to it.
Well, to some extent, a lot of the efforts that I've been involved in, we were too successful. And I know it sounds a little arrogant. I don't mean it to. But we have a supermajority in the House now, which is a little ridiculous. We have a Democratic Socialist Caucus, which is something I never thought we would have. And when you get in situations like that, you got to make sure that you have those various factions covered. Don't assume that if you have two members of leadership, all of a sudden you're going to have the whole caucus. And in Colorado, that's very much particularly true. And that's in both chambers. The Senate's not supermajority, but never make an assumption that just because there's a D behind their name, that they're going to be okay with this. Or if there's an R behind their name, they're going to be okay with it. Because in Colorado, we have people that go rogue all the time.
But they all stayed in alignment on this one.
Yeah, well, because part of it is that making sure that they see the personal interest in this. And also what helps is in terms of, United for Privacy's efforts in multiple states. When we can say to a Republican legislator, we can say to a Democratic legislator, hey, this is going to be the 20th state that's done this. And we've done it in very conservative states, and Colorado needs to be one of the first blue states. Some people would argue purple. I think it's a little bit more blue. And it's really important that we have this kind of support early on within the legislative process, and that everybody hold.
Shayne,
I'll echo.
go ahead.
I would just say, and then obviously if Shayne wants to weigh in, I think I want to emphasize Ted's point, which is that, especially in Colorado, you're dealing with some members who are Democratic Socialists. You're dealing with some members who are Freedom Caucus, very conservative Republicans. And then in both parties, more moderate members that are maybe more traditional, old school, what we think of as Republicans and Democrats. And all of them agreed. It's an amazing phenomenon that I don't think should be understated, but the reason or the method for doing that is making each member personally understand how this impacts them. Yes, they're an elected official, but I'm sure as an elected official, they are passionate about various causes and issues. And so you connect them to those issues that matter to them, and you explain, if you have donor disclosure for nonprofits, generally, those groups that you care about likely go away because their members and supporters are going to be harassed and attacked by their ideological opponents. And I think it's, especially in this competitive world, political and world we find ourselves in, competitive and I would say at times hyperbolic, you certainly can. It's easier in a sense for lawmakers to understand the danger that lies ahead and why the PPPA is helpful to securing those rights for groups that elected officials support and believe in.
And having those groups contact legislators independent of our lobbying efforts, of course,
Awesome.
is always very helpful.
What about the governor's office? What was their take? I'd imagine they saw this bill with unanimous support from both chambers. They're like, well, this is an easy one. There's no veto here. But what did they have any specific insights or thoughts on this initiative?
Just a matter of communication, making sure that they know what's going on and how this is progressing, so there aren't any surprises. And the other thing too about this is, and Shayne was talking about this a little bit earlier, is to be calm. If you know this thing is moving and you have bipartisan support, don't make it a bigger issue than you need to. But also make sure, and this is obvious, but you want to make sure that they don't get surprised, that they understand what it is, that this is something with our governor. It's like, look, you can go to Second Amendment advocates or gun rights advocates. I don't know what the PC term is I'm supposed to use for folks on the right. And they're going to see that this is beneficial. But then on the left, you're going to see people, Planned Parenthood, at gay rights organizations. They're going to look at this and they're going to like it too. And for any governor, whether they're Democrat or Republican, at least I know what Democrats, if you say it's bipartisan, they're like all about it. Let's stand in front of the parade. I'll be the majorette. And, that's something that we had with Governor Polis in Colorado.
I agree. It was definitely done, but communication is key, and keeping your head about you is also key, because it's easy to become a little bit hair on fire with an issue like this, because it does attract some scary stories sometimes, and you just need to tamp them down.
So what advice would you guys give to people in other states who want to build a similar type of coalition in their state? What are some key lessons that could be taken from Colorado and applied elsewhere?
Well, I think it's key, and I know this is kind of a blatant pitch, but this really is true, is to have people like Nese involved, because you need an expert who understands this in multiple states, understands the law, understands what's going on within disclosure, understands what happened with HR1, the Disclose Act, how that would affect things on the ground. Because if you're trying to fly blind and do it by yourself, you're going to run into problems because there's going to be a state agency that says, hey, but what about this situation or that situation? And you're going to have a labor union come up and say, hey, wait a minute, what about our membership list and folks that, are part of a public employees union? And having someone that has all that experience is critical because it shortens the amount of time that you need in order to solve whatever possible disagreement that you have.
That's a really good point, Ted. And I'm going to be unabashedly in favor of Matt's involvement here, because every time you have an issue that revolves around the First Amendment, frankly, you're going to have lawyers who play in the nuances. And we tend to get a little too cute by half. And having that sane 50-state view can really save time and move the ball down the field. Because every lawyer wants to have their own point of view, have a place in the sun, even for 5 minutes, but that place in the sun can sometimes set you back.
Funny, there's an old joke. You ask 10 different lawyers their opinion on something, you'll get 15 different answers.
Oh,
At
yeah,
least.
and we charge double too. It's really fun.
Matt, were you going to add something there?
Well, I was going to say, I guess just cloning me is the answer, but I'm joking, obviously. No, I think if you're talking generally and moving past this issue, Brian, getting to a part of your question, I think going back to what we talked about earlier, respecting your opponents and and being willing to talk to groups you don't ordinarily work with. I think, in any policy, you're obviously inclined to work with those you're comfortable with or that agree with you, even if you're working on slightly different issues. Maybe you have similar political views more broadly, and people know each other, so it's not hard. But I think, even if you're going down that route, you need to be upfront from the beginning that you are going to talk to other groups about this. This is bipartisan. We are not doing this for partisan reasons. We're doing this on principle and for the policy itself, and we think it applies broadly. This is not an effort to target X organization or X issue. I think that's where you start, and you need to be willing to talk with others, and that can be hard to talk with others you're not used to talking to, or you're maybe used to fighting. It's hard to generalize this for just any old issue, but I think generally speaking, respect and being transparent about your goals, and that this is not a partisan exercise, building trust, all of that is crucial. And that's also why some of these efforts, when you want to do them in a more bipartisan way, as PUFP does with everything, they're going to be slower by nature, because building trust doesn't happen overnight, and conversations with folks you don't know as well are not going to happen overnight. And so just gaming it out and being willing to play the long game as opposed to just rushing in like a bull in a china shop is something that's going to be paramount.
And also, I think it's important to put a shameless plug in for my organization, the Independence Institute. We really have nothing to do with candidate politics. We're really about issues as a 501c3. And because of that, I think we were able to bring to the table, at least on the center right, a little bit more credibility and tamp down some of the fears on the center left.
All right, so we are at time. Any quick closing thoughts, final pitches, or plugs you guys want to say? Closing words for the good of the group?
Well, I just think it's really important that we do this, because with this wave of what's happening around campaign finance reform, we need to make sure that we don't accidentally pick up, that mom that gives to a cause, that family that really cares about a particular cause, because then you could all of a sudden have these people doxxed because you have an activist AG or you have an activist head of a Department of Revenue. And it's better to work and solve this problem or prevent it on the front end than to try to solve this on the back end.
Matt?
I'll just say quickly that staying vigilant is important. Obviously, this is a tremendous victory we've secured in Colorado that should benefit untold groups, but it's always easy for people to slip into, well, now I'm focused on my opponent and I want to attack them and I want to know you know, what nonprofits and what groups are supporting issues that my opponent supports, and I want to shut them down too, especially as election season ramps up. I think it's just in the nature of elected officials to think like that, and so staying vigilant and being aware of threats and pointing back to what passed and why it passed, the safeguards that exist and why they exist are going to be crucial. And that's not just true in Colorado, that's true in every state as you go towards election season. And so, you know, this is a big victory, but the overall battle and for donor privacy, member privacy for nonprofits, it's never ending in some sense.
Shayne, thank you for being our DH this
Thank
afternoon.
you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you, Ted, Matt, and thank you all of you for joining and staying with us. We look forward to, we hope to make these quarterly, so stay tuned. We'll hopefully do another one with another really exciting topic and exciting group of panelists. Thank you all very much.